Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Safety Net, Brookline Interactive Group's show dedicated to domestic violence and during COVID, many other issues. Welcome. I'm Susan Howard, a local attorney who focuses on domestic violence, restraining orders, battering, etc. And today we have an unusual guest with us, Arden Reamer. Brookline born and bred, I think born and bred, longtime resident, product of the schools, living in Brookline now, 2 children, product of the schools, and believe it or not, first-time candidate for town meeting. Welcome, Arden. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you, Susan. And let me just correct one thing. I am actually not a product of the public schools of Brookline. I went to Beaver Country Day. However, I should say that my gym teacher there in 1984 was my children's principal at the former Devotion School. He's now retired.
I'm glad you corrected me. So sorry about that. But you are a Brookline resident for many years, right?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. My family moved here in 1981, actually. And my children are in the public schools of Brookline. My daughter right now is in 6th grade at the Florida Ruffin Ridley School. And my son, who has been there for 9 years, is actually in Remote Learning Academy for his 8th grade year.
Terrific. And can you tell us a little bit about your background and work with domestic violence and what's most unusual and homelessness?
Yes.
Little.
Thank you, Susan. I'd love to. So after I graduated from college, I moved to Seattle, Washington. And there I first started as a volunteer with Pathways for Women YWCA, which is a homeless shelter in Lynnwood, Washington for single mothers with children. And they provided both emergency and transitional housing. And I ended up staying there for many years. I finished my master's degree in education with a focus in mental health counseling, did my practicum work there, and then ended up working there as the children and youth services manager. Now, keep in mind, this was in the 90s. And then, and as today, the number one reason for homelessness, and you're the expert, so you would know this, the number one reason for homelessness for mothers and children is domestic violence.
Yes, because oftentimes, in fact, I have a case now where a woman had to leave her home, was evicted. Husband could well afford to pay on the mortgage, but chose not to. 4 children, and the courts really, and even though we have many groups that advocate for domestic violence, nobody could help her. She lived in her van for months until her family took her in, which was wonderful. And now she's pretty much independent and on her own. But I think one of the problems, and homelessness in general, we just don't have enough housing. We don't have enough shelters. We don't have enough anything. And I don't know what we can do about it. How are homelessness and domestic violence related? I know I've told a little bit, but.
So Susan, I totally agree with you. And that story just really hits home for me. It's so tragic. And it's been around since the 90s when I was working in the field, and it hasn't changed. And I consider them to be the underserved population. And a lot of people, I think about low income or poverty as underserved, but I also include homelessness and domestic violence. And the two are absolutely interrelated, especially for mothers and children, And it's so tragic that we're still working hard and advocating for this population today.
Why is this population so hard to serve? Why? I know money's an issue. Leaving aside money, okay? There seems to be less of an interest now in domestic violence than there was, say, pre-COVID or 5 years ago. Seriously, I don't understand. Maybe you have an insight.
I don't, because I'm not, you're more of an expert. I'm not, and you're involved in the legal side of it. I'm not involved in the actual field today, but I think that if I were to wager a guess, it's that we need more services for women and children, period. That the last 4 years have really impacted what the government, how our local government and our national government have involved themselves in providing these services and supporting these services. And I think Massachusetts on a local level does a pretty good job. And I'm not really sure about Brookline. You may know more about that, but I think it's a national crisis. I think, and I'm hoping that the Biden administration, I think tonight, he's going to announce, and I understand this is not a political show, but he's going to announce the American Families Act. And I am really cautiously optimistic that this is going to help change things. And I think COVID has only contributed to this. I think the children in the school building is one way of accessing them, and therefore their families, because they're very much, I think, domestic violence and homelessness, when it comes to mothers and children, it's very much about the family unit. And I think it's very hard to access them sometimes. And the schools is one way to do that. But if we've had them out of the school now for almost 2 school years, I mean, they're finally back in now. It's very hard to access this population.
Can you talk a little bit about homelessness in Brookline? I don't know very much about it in Brookline. I know it exists. I don't know what resources there are. I don't know what we do about it. I do see some regulars around Coolidge Corner. And I know the authorities are aware of these regulars and in the library. So if you could sort of give us a little background, whatever you know.
It's really just like you from observation, because as I said, I'm not involved in the field now. I'm at home with my children and literally at home with them for the last 2 years. But I too see a lot of homelessness around Coolidge Corner. Certainly the middle-aged men who are on the street, and I walk my dog early in the morning, so I see them around. I live right in the heart of Coolidge Corner, and I see them around, and it's tragic. I also see some who come in to Brookline who sit, say, on the bench at the end of Stedman Street at Harvard Street and panhandle for money, and I do what I can to support them. But in terms of housing itself for homelessness, because that's a key part of it. On Beale Street, I live on Stedman Street, one street over on Beale Street, there are 2 transitional housing homes for Pine Street Inn. However, I do not see very many. This is not for women and children. There are very few women there. It is mostly men. But it's wonderful that they have this, because any type of housing is important. And then, of course, we know that there is a relatively new transitional housing. I believe it's transitional housing shelter for women and their children. I don't know anything about this. You might know more. And I don't want to reveal too much in terms of what I've observed with these particular units, because it's just from an observational point of view. But I certainly wish that Brookline, I mean, we're a very affluent community here. I think we do a wonderful job with our seniors. I think we do a wonderful job with our school-age children, but I wish we could do more to address homelessness.
Are there any organizations that you would recommend we contact or maybe even join or get involved in the town? And are you part of any greater network of advocates for homeless in the town? Are you planning on it?
I haven't really been involved in it in the last few years, because with the Trump administration, I've really been focused on women's reproductive rights. I mean, that's really where my passion lies. So I've been focused more on that and our clinic here in Brookline, and of course our national clinics. But that's not to say that running for town meeting. So this is my first time, and we're not going to get political here, but this is and I'm uncontested. So I don't even have an opponent, but I will say that I'm hoping that at my age and my stage of life in running for political office for the first time, that I can begin to become more aware of these issues and hopefully identify some of these organizations or perhaps some public funds that are available. And I'm hoping in that way, it's one way to sort of access this, different than your profession, which is from the legal perspective and as an advocate. But I'm hoping that I can learn more and do more. And maybe if I come on your show in the future, I will have an answer for you.
Let me ask you a personal question. What made you decide to run for town meeting? That's a huge decision, huge. I'm not sure you realize how it's going to impact your life, your children's life, Oreo's life, your husband's life. What made you make that decision? Your mom?
Thank you for asking me that. Yes, my mother is a tremendous role model in my life, and she's actually a senior here in Brookline, and she's a longtime Brookline resident. And my brother is too, I should say, my younger brother. But no, actually, it's because after over a year focused on my children and their education and Oreo, of course, and my husband and my family, although my husband's very self-sufficient and a wonderful support for me, that I wanted to do something for myself and my passion, which is this town and our community, our local businesses, and our public school education. And I wanted to do something in support of that. And I never thought I would run for public office, but I am so proud and so pleased to be doing it. I really am. When I saw my husband and I both voted by mail already. And when I saw my name on the ballot, I was so proud and pleased.
Oh my gosh, has it taken up all of your time?
No, because conveniently, I have been involved in politics here in Precinct 8 and in North Brookline and Brookline in general for so many years now that I almost know all of the voters here in Precinct 8. And so when Oreo and I go out and do our afternoon, we do a lunchtime walk and then an afternoon and an evening walk, sometimes 2, sometimes 3. I walk the streets of Precinct 8. I bring my little flyers with me and I do my campaigning. And because we've been, in a pandemic and at home and quarantined and all these different things for so long, it as an extrovert, a true extrovert, and Oreo is too, I love to get out and I love to talk to people. And so it's one of my favorite things to do, to be campaigning with Oreo, and especially now that spring is here.
So let me ask you a question. Assuming, and you're going to be elected because it's uncontested.
Right.
What 3 things for domestic violence and 2 things for homelessness do you expect to accomplish as a town meeting member?
Ooh, that's a tall order. 5 things. No, that's a good question. I'm not really sure at this point, but I'm going to figure it out. And sometimes I'm an extrovert, so I like to, immediately give an answer if I can possibly do that. Sometimes I don't even think, I just speak. But in this case, I really need to do some problem solving. And I know right now, one of my top 2 issues is access and equity. Now, I think a lot about that in terms of race, in terms of affordability, in terms of inclusion. I think that's really important for our town of Brookline. But I'd also like to think about that in terms of domestic violence and homelessness. And that's going to mean access and equity to resources, to financial assistance, to support, to our political process. And so this is something that's going to unfold for me over the next 2 years. I'm going to be elected to a 2-year term. And then I hope that I can get back to you about that in a year, Susan, and say, look, this is what I've done. This is what I've brought to town meeting. And one of the processes that we have in town meeting is warrant articles. And they have a wonderful instruction manual on how to write a warrant article. And hopefully in the next 2 years, this is something I can work on, and I'll figure out where our resources are most needed for that here in our town. Now, I realize that's sort of one answer for you. Of course, another focus of mine is progressive environmental policy. And I do feel that the climate crisis impacts all of us. And maybe maybe it's not as directly attributed to, say, domestic violence and homelessness here in Brookline, but if you look at the whole world and how the climate crisis is impacting the whole world, especially women and children, because they tend to be the poorest and they tend to have the least access, I would say it's an issue that really impacts us all, even domestic violence and homelessness here in Brookline.
One last question. How do you plan on educating fellow town meeting members on your passion for integrating resources for homelessness and domestic violence? How would you go about it?
Well, in case you haven't noticed this, Susan, I am a squeaky wheel for sure. And I love, as I told you before in my campaigning with Oreo, talking to people. And so I absolutely plan to do that. I think a cohesive, group process is so important. And that's what I love about town meeting. It really is. It's our legislative body. I think there are 15 representatives from 16 precincts. And so we're a group. And the other thing that I mentioned before is the warrant article process. And often many people collaborate with other town meeting members or even non-town meeting members to write warrant articles. So that's one way that we could even, enact laws or bylaws around this particular issue of homelessness and domestic violence. So those are all things that are on the table right now. I look forward to learning more about this process and how it really plays in here in Brookline.
Arden, you're wonderful. I respect your passion. It's so refreshing. Thank you so much, Arden Reamer, for being on the safety net and bringing these two issues, domestic violence and homelessness, to our attention. I wish you the very best in your election, although I don't have to worry about you like we do about some elections because it's uncontested. I hope you'll come back. And if you want to put your contact information at the bottom, I think Corbin can run it. Hopefully we'll see you soon, and I'll see you around the hood with Oreo and Bailey at 6:30 in the morning. Bye, Reamer. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Susan. Bye-bye. Thank you.